3 summers ago, I lost a whole bed of tomatoes. 14 plants gone by August, and I hadn't seen a single hornworm or a spot of blight. I killed them myself with a garden hose and good intentions, and when I finally figured out what I'd been doing wrong, my yields that next year damn near doubled on half the water. That's what we're talking about today. Because if you're like most folks I meet, you're standing out there every morning or every evening with a hose in your hand, soaking your garden like it's your job, and you're quietly drowning the very plants you're trying to help. Overwatering kills more vegetables in this country than bugs and disease put together. It's not even close. And the frustrating part is, most gardeners have no idea they're the problem. I'm going to walk you through exactly how I water now, what my dad taught me about it after I'd already learned the hard way, and how to get deeper roots, tougher plants, and bigger harvests while spending less time, while fussing with the hose. Stick with me to the end because I'm going to share a simple trick with a wooden dowel that tells you in about 5 seconds whether a plant actually needs water, and it'll save you from about 90% of the mistakes folks make out there. Let me be straight with you before we go any further. I did this wrong for close to 20 years. My father watered every single morning like clockwork, and I thought that's what good gardeners did. Then I moved out, got my own patch of dirt, and I watered every morning too, and every evening if it was hot, because I figured more had to be better. I had plants flopping over, leaves yellowing from the bottom up, tomatoes cracking, peppers dropping their blossoms, and I blamed the weather, the soil, the seeds, the squirrels. I blamed everything except the hose in my own hand. Then one summer we had a bad drought, and I couldn't water but twice a week. I figured I'd lose the whole garden. Instead, I had the best harvest of my life. That was the moment I shut up and started paying attention. I went back and called my dad, and he laughed at me, and he said, "Son, I've been telling you that for 30 years. You just weren't listening." Here's the piece that changed everything for me, and it's not complicated. Roots grow toward water. That's it. That's the whole principle. If water is always sitting right at the surface of your soil, your plants will build a shallow, lazy root system because they don't need to work for it. Shallow roots mean the plant wilts the second the top inch of soil dries out. It means weak stems, poor nutrient uptake, and a plant that depends on you for every drop. Now, when you water deeply and let that top layer dry out between waterings, the roots have to chase the moisture down. They dive. Research from places like Texas A&M and the University of California has shown over and over that deep, infrequent watering pushes tomato and pepper roots down 18 inches or more, where the soil stays cooler and moister on its own. My dad called it training the plant. He said if you baby a plant, you get a baby plant. If you make it work a little, you get a worker. Once you wrap your head around that, everything we're about to talk about makes sense. You're not trying to keep the soil wet. You're trying to teach those roots to go find water on their own. Now let me show you exactly how to do this, start to finish. The first thing you have to do is check your soil before you ever turn the hose on. I know that sounds obvious, but I'd bet good money that most of you reading this water on a schedule instead of on a need. You water because it's Tuesday, or because it didn't rain, or because the weatherman said it'd be hot. That's backwards. Here's what you do instead. Walk out there and stick your finger straight down into the soil right next to the plant, about 2 knuckles deep. That's roughly 2 inches. If the soil feels cool and damp at that depth, you do not need to water. Walk away. If it feels dry and crumbly at 2 inches, then you think about watering. For most vegetable gardens in most zones, the real trigger point is when the top 2 to 3 inches are dry, but it's still damp underneath. That's your green light. The conventional approach is to water whenever the surface looks dry. What I've found works better is ignoring the surface entirely. The top half inch of soil in full sun will dry out in an hour. It tells you nothing. It's the 2 to 4 inch zone that tells you the truth. Now here's where most folks go wrong on the actual watering. When you decide it's time to water, you need to water deep. I'm talking soaking that soil down 6 to 8 inches, not sprinkling the surface for 2 minutes. For a standard raised bed, 4 foot by 8 foot, that's going to be somewhere around 10 to 15 gallons of water per watering. For in-ground gardens, figure about 1 inch of water over the whole area, which works out to roughly 0.6 of a gallon per square foot. You can set an empty tuna can out in your garden while you water, and when it has 1 inch of water in it, you're done. Simple as that. The reason this matters comes down to root behavior. A shallow 10-minute sprinkle wets the top inch and then evaporates by lunchtime. The roots never see that water long enough to follow it down. A deep soaking, on the other hand, pushes moisture 8 inches into the soil where it lingers for days, and the roots grow right down into that reservoir. For most gardens, once you're watering deep like this, you only need to water every 4 to 7 days in the heat of summer. In spring or fall, you might go 10 to 14 days. If you're in zones 3 through 5 with cooler summers, you'll water even less. If you're in the hot southern zones, 7 through 9, you might be on the 4-day end of that range during July and August. But it's still a fraction of what most people do. Let me tell you, something my dad drilled into me. He said, if you can't water deep, don't water at all, because a shallow drink is worse than no drink. Before I get into the rest of this, let me ask a quick favor. If any of what I'm saying is starting to click, and you want more straight talk gardening advice without all the fancy products and trendy nonsense, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I put out practical, old school gardening videos every week. The kind of stuff my father taught me, and I've been testing in my own dirt for decades. No hype, no hustle, just what works. All right, let's keep going. The next thing that matters, and this is one folks mess up constantly, is when you water. Morning, between 6 and 9 a.m. is the only right answer for most situations. Not evening, not midday, morning. Here's why. When you water in the morning, the sun comes up and dries the foliage within an hour or two. Dry leaves don't grow fungus. If you water in the evening, those leaves sit wet all night long, and that's an open invitation for powdery mildew, blight, and every other fungal disease that shows up in late summer. I watered in the evening for years because it felt cooler and kinder to the plants. I just didn't realize I was handing out party invitations to every spore in the neighborhood. Midday watering isn't the end of the world, but you lose a lot to evaporation before it ever reaches the roots. If that's your only option because of work or whatever, it's better than nothing. But if you can manage it, set an alarm and get out there with your coffee first thing in the morning. Your plants will thank you, and your fungal pressure will drop noticeably by midsummer. The other piece here is where you aim that water. Get the hose down at the base of the plant, at the soil level, and keep it off the leaves entirely. A drip irrigation or a good soaker hose is the gold standard for this. If you're using a watering can or a hose, use a wand attachment and put the water right on the dirt. The next thing, and this is probably the single biggest labor saver in any garden, is mulch. If you're not mulching, you're fighting this battle with one hand tied behind your back. A good 3 to 4 inch layer of organic mulch, shredded leaves, straw, wood chips, grass clippings that have dried, any of that, will cut your watering needs in half. I mean that literally. Half. The mulch keeps the soil cool, it slows evaporation, it suppresses weeds that compete for water, and as it breaks down, it feeds the soil. It's the closest thing to free money you'll find in gardening. When I mulch a tomato row in June, I don't touch that hose for 10 to 14 days at a time, even in Georgia heat. Without mulch, that same row would need water every 3 days. The math on that is pretty obvious. A couple of things to watch. Keep the mulch pulled back about 2 inches from the actual stem of each plant. You don't want it piled up against the stem because that traps Moisture, right where the plant is most vulnerable to rot. Think donut, not volcano. And if you're using wood chips, use ones that are already aged a bit, not fresh from the chipper, because fresh chips can tie up nitrogen as they break down. Now here's where it gets interesting. Once you're watering deep, watering in the morning, and mulching properly, you can start doing something most gardeners are afraid to do. You can let your plants get a little thirsty on purpose. I know that sounds counterintuitive, sounds almost cruel, but this is the tough love piece my dad taught me, and it works. When a plant feels a mild water stress, nothing severe, just a slight afternoon droop, it sends a signal down to the roots to grow deeper and wider. The plant builds itself a bigger underground network to hunt for water. That network then supports a bigger, stronger, more productive plant all season long. Here's how you do it safely. Once your plants are established, say 4 to 6 weeks after transplanting, let the soil dry out a little longer than feels comfortable. Watch the plants in the late afternoon. If you see a slight wilt on the leaves around 4 or 5 p.m., but the plants perk right back up by the next morning on their own, that's the sweet spot. That's training. That's the plant sending roots deeper. And if the plants are still wilted the next morning, you waited too long. Water deeply right then, and back off the interval just a touch next time. Now, a couple of caveats. Don't do this with seedlings or freshly transplanted plants. They don't have the root system to handle it yet. Water those consistently for the first 3 to 4 weeks. Don't do this during flowering or fruit set for tomatoes, peppers, squash, or cucumbers, because water stress during those windows can cause blossom drop and split fruit. And leafy greens like lettuce, spinach, and chard don't like this treatment either. They just turn bitter and bolt. This technique is for established, mature, fruiting plants and root crops. The last piece is adjusting your whole approach for what you're growing and what time of year it is. Not every plant wants the same thing, and treating a squash plant like a tomato plant is a recipe for a frustrating summer. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and most fruiting crops want deep, infrequent watering. Exactly what we've been talking about. Every 4 to 7 days in summer, deep soak each time. Cucumbers, squash, melons, and beans drink a lot more water and drink it faster because of how big their leaves get. Plan on watering those every 3 to 5 days in peak summer, same deep soak method. Root crops like carrots, beets, and onions want consistent, even moisture. They're the one exception where you want the soil to stay more uniformly damp, because big swings in moisture cause them to crack or split. Water those a bit more often, every 3 to 4 days, but still deep. Leafy greens are shallow rooted and genuinely do need more frequent watering, every 2 to 3 days, but even then water deep enough to soak 3 to 4 inches down. Seasonally back off hard in spring and fall. In April and October, your garden needs maybe a third of what it needs in July. A lot of folks overwater in the shoulder seasons because they're already in the habit, and that's when root rot and damping off take the biggest toll. One more thing on seasonal adjustment. After a rain, actually check the soil the next day before you water. An inch of rain will handle most of a week in cool weather, and you don't need to add more on top of it. All right, now let me hit the common patterns I see folks fall into, because if you're doing any of these, you're working against yourself. The first one is watering every single day on a schedule. I see this more than anything else. Somebody gets on a routine of watering every morning and never breaks it, rain or shine. That trains roots to stay shallow, keeps the soil surface constantly wet, and invites fungal problems. Check before you water. Skip the days you don't need. The second pattern is the quick sprinkle. Folks come out, hit everything for 2 minutes with a hose, and call it done. That's worse than not watering at all, because you're teaching the plant that water only exists in the top ½ inch. When a real dry spell hits, those shallow roots can't save the plant. I did this myself for years. Deep and infrequent beats shallow, and often every single time. The third pattern is overhead watering on the leaves. Sprinklers, spray wands aimed up at the plant all of that. You lose water to evaporation, you leave the actual root zone dry, and you set up perfect conditions for foliar disease. Get the water on the soil, not the leaves. The fourth one is watering based on what the surface looks like. A dry-looking surface doesn't mean a dry root zone. In hot sun, the top will look parched within an hour of a good soaking. Don't trust your eyes, trust your finger, or better yet, the tool I'm about to show you. All right, I promised you a trick at the beginning, and here it is. This is the single most useful watering tool I own, and it costs nothing. Take a wooden dowel about 3/4 of an inch thick and 12 inches long. A piece of bamboo works. An old broken tomato stake works. Hardwood is best because it doesn't splinter. Sharpen one end just a little so it slides into the soil easier. When you want to know if your garden needs water, push that dowel straight down into the soil next to a plant about 8 to 10 inches deep. Push it in, leave it there for about 30 seconds, then pull it out and look at it. Here's what you're reading. If the bottom few inches of the dowel come out dark and stained with damp soil clinging to them, you have plenty of moisture down where the roots are. Do not water. If the dowel comes out clean and dry all the way down, you need a deep soaking right now. If the top 4 inches are dry, but the bottom is damp and stained, you're right in the sweet spot. Wait another day or two and check again. This works because that dowel is reading the exact depth where your feeder roots live. The surface lies to you. The dowel tells the truth. I've got one stuck in my tomato bed right now, and I pull it every couple of days, and it has saved me from overwatering more times than I can count. My father used a broken tool handle for the same thing for 50 years. He never called it anything fancy. He just called it checking the dirt. You can pay $40 for a fancy moisture meter if you want, but I've tested them against the dowel, and the dowel wins. Simpler. No batteries, and it doesn't corrode. Before I let you go, if this is the kind of straight-ahead, no-nonsense gardening advice you've been looking for, hit subscribe and leave me a comment down below. Tell me how often you've been watering your garden, honestly, and whether any of this hit home. I read every single comment, and I'd love to hear what you're growing this year and where you're gardening from. That kind of feedback is what helps me put together these videos in the first place. So here's where we land. 3 summers ago, I killed 14 tomato plants with kindness and a garden hose. Now I water about 1/3 as often, my plants are twice as strong, and my harvests speak for themselves. Put the hose down, trust your plants a little more, let those roots go to work, and get yourself a wooden dowel. Until next time, keep it simple, keep it honest, and keep on growing.